In the final epilogue, Lucia decides the only way she's getting out alive is by killing the Mimic. She makes a plan to trick it into climbing into the court jester suit and spring-locking it. She goes back to the hidden room behind the stage where the court jester is, and begins disabling the other costume zippers, so the Mimic's only option will be to climb in the court jester suit. As she's doing this, the costumes in the room begin to sway, and she has the disturbing realization that the Mimic is hiding in one of them. She continues disabling the costumes, and on the 10th one, her luck finally runs out. The room's dim bulb glints off something metal within a dark brown gopher costume. The Mimic leaps out of it, its limbs extend and expand, searching the other costumes. Lucia ducks between a blackbird and a purple lion costume, both of which are references. The blackbird suit seems to be a reference to Blackbird, a character from Fazbear Frights, and the purple lion is the costume the Mimic wore in its origin story when it killed Dominic. Now all three of the Mimic's origin story murder costumes have appeared in the epilogues. Thanks to Lucia's tampering, only two costumes are usable. A flat-furred Holy Tiger costume, likely a reference to David's tiger obsession, and the Springlock Court Jester. None of that matters since the Mimic finds Lucia first, and begins to crawl into the mouth of her costume in an attempt to crush her. By this point, the Mimic has abandoned the cleanup protocol, having crushed Kelly in the blue dog costume and now attempting to similarly kill Lucia. She narrowly escapes the suit and it falls over the Mimic, who flails its arms trying to get control of the costume. Lucia quickly wraps a rope around the costume's legs and the Mimic topples over. It reconfigures itself into a worm-like form and begins extracting itself from the suit, then reconfigures into its upright form. Lucia puts her head in the court jester suit and baits the Mimic into the costume, then quickly exits as it crawls inside. Channeling her inner Edwin, she grabs a metal rod and begins beating the court jester costume. But the springlocks don't activate, despite how easily triggered they are. Springlocks clearly do what the plot demands, because slight laughter and cupcake bites activate them, but not repeated bashing with a metal rod. The Mimic begins climbing out through the mouth of the costume, and a compressed piece of metal enlarges itself and morphs into the Mimic's head. Its gaze locks on Lucia and it opens its mouth. She quickly holds the metal rod like a spear and stabs into the Mimic's mouth. This jolts its head back, finally setting off the springlocks and filling the room with a clamoring cascade of metal striking metal. The court jester violently moves all at once as the Mimic is impaled by the springlocks, and the suit is soaked in the endoskeleton's oil, paralleling how the blue dog costume was soaked in Kelly's blood. There are a lot of callbacks in the Mimic's defeat. Lucia beating the Mimic with a metal rod is reminiscent of how Edwin also beat it with a metal rod, which led to its murderous behavior. The court jester was also the first costume the Mimic wore in its origin story. Using the costume to defeat the Mimic in the final epilogue is a nice reverse of how its story began. After the springlocks have done their work, the Mimic is left writhing inside the court jester, its head protruding from the costume's mouth, but the light in its eyes is fading. Its movements are frantic, it's now the victim. Lucia fears if she waits longer, the Mimic will find a way to self-repair.